So Miyazaki has recently done an interview answering a few more things about Shadow of the Erdtree as it gets closer. I want to go over a few of these question by question, and there's an article that I want to go over with you guys as well that could shed some light on what we're getting in Shadow of the Erdtree. I know one of my biggest disappointments in hearing about the DLC was the fact that it was only going to be as big as Limgrave. However, I think that's not the case, so let's go ahead and jump into it. So starting out with the article that mentions the Miyazaki interview, it goes all the way back to talking about when Elden Ring first released. Back then, Yashiro Katao, and believe me, I apologize if I am mispronouncing names, I am doing the best that I can, in January 2022, that he thought Elden Ring would take about 30 hours to beat the story. However, as the majority of us found out, we were putting 10 plus hours in before we even got to Margit the Fell Omen. With that being said, it took even longer to beat him, and then get into the actual rest of the game, which took far longer than that. So I feel, as this article says, that FromSoft vastly underestimated how long Elden Ring was going to be, and I feel like now they're underselling Shadow of the Erdtree DLC in much the same way. However, if they aren't, and the actual DLC is only a little bit larger than Limgrave, we need to also realize that Limgrave had an entire underground segment in it, which was the Shifra River. Now, the Miyazaki interview also says that this is the biggest DLC that FromSoft has ever taken on. So with that being said, this definitely is going to be a huge chunk of content, and I think it's going to keep us busy for a while. Now, with all that aside, whatever we do get, I'm going to be very, very pleased with, because FromSoft doesn't miss. But I want to look at these questions from a Chinese outlet named Bonfire that's been translated by this user right here, so definitely go check out his Twitter to get more news on DLC. So there are a ton of questions asked of Miyazaki in this interview about Shadow of the Erdtree. However, I'm only going to go over a few of them that I think highlight what we all want to know, but if you want to go and look at the article, it's going to be linked down in the YouTube description below, so you can go check that out. So the first question that Miyazaki was approached with is as follows: why did you decide to tell Shadow of the Golden Tree in the form of a large-scale DLC? And Miyazaki answers, in fact, we already had relevant ideas when developing the game itself. Elden Ring was developed and based on the mythology created by Mr. George R.R. Martin. At the time, he felt that the volume was too large and too difficult to fit all into the main body, therefore these contents are not deliberately arranged in DLC, but were already existing parts. This is incredibly interesting to me because they actually don't have anything quote-unquote new that is in the DLC. All of these ideas, all of the NPCs we might see, all of this stuff was actually already supposed to be in the game, but George R.R. Martin thought it would be too convoluted, so it's now in the DLC. This is very interesting to me, and I cannot wait to see what this stuff is. The next question that the interview asked Miyazaki is very interesting because a lot of people have also been speculating this in my comments. The interviewer said, with the launch of the DLC content, will the story of the main game be reorganized? In short, Miyazaki said no. I know a lot of people were curious if Millicent would show up or if different NPCs from Elden Ring would show up in the DLC, but it appears that if a NPC's story ends in the main storyline as we've already seen, then chances of them showing up in the Shadow of the Erdtree DLC seem pretty slim. Miyazaki says, just like our other games, my idea is that the story part is expected to be completed by the players themselves. The player's own gameplay is also part of the story, so the story of this article will not be adjusted through the DLC. Of course, if there are obvious bugs, they will be fixed, but there will be no changes to the plot. The next question I found really interesting. The interviewer asked, it has been more than 2 years since the original content of the game was released, and many players' levels and equipment have already been formed, so how should the enemy's strength and difficulty in the DLC be balanced? I think this is an excellent question because a lot of us have been playing this game religiously, and everyone is pretty overpowered regardless of if you're past the level 150 meta or not. We know the mechanics of the game, we know how everything works, we know the buffs and things to stack to make us absolute gods of the game, so what does FromSoft plan to do about that? And the answer that Miyazaki gave was this: the difficulty of DLC is about the same as the second half of the game, because it is necessary to defeat Latan and Munger. At this time, players should have a certain understanding of the game, generally speaking, because it is the second half. The difficulty is relatively high. We also introduce a new level element in the DLC, and you can freely choose to challenge intensity. For example, if the player's level in the body is already very high, you can choose to turn off growth and not upgrade this new attribute to challenge the enemy. But if you feel that it is already difficult for you, you can continue to improve the new attribute and the character's strength. So a few things here. First and foremost, Latarn and Munger, I believe, are Radahn and Moog. Or it could be a translation error, but if you know down in the comments, leave it down below because I'm really curious as to who they might be. Also, the other thing I really want to point out here is that we may have gotten the name of the new attribute that's going to be taking place in the DLC. Miyazaki mentions growth. I don't know if that's growth in terms of your player just gaining more levels, or I don't know if growth is just a new attribute that we're going to be dealing with for the DLC, and that could be the new leveling system, but it seems like you can turn it on and off depending on your character's difficulty you're having through the game. I know myself personally, I'm going to be playing the DLC how it was intended to be played, so I'm probably going to go for the most difficult level possible. Now, for all of you lore buffs out there, one of the questions that was asked about the plot is as follows: will the DLC resolve any plot concerns, or will it bring new content worthy of discussion? Miyazaki answers that some of the mysteries left by the main body will be answered. As for whether it will bring more new pitfalls on this basis, I cannot guarantee that overall. Through DLC, we will have a deeper understanding of the world, view, and game story. So I think overall we're going to have a few answers of things that we've been asking, but overall it is a FromSoft game, and we are probably going to be left with just as many questions as we had before the DLC. The next interview question was as follows: will there be new forces appearing in the DLC? Do the factions in this article, such as the Stars and Two Fingers, still have influence in the world of the Shadowlands? Miyazaki says it depends on how you defined power. Of course, there will be new groups, and on this basis, some of the organizations in the article will be further completed. I really like this, and it makes me think of the Covenants that were in Dark Souls 1. I think it would be really awesome if we had some kind of faction that we could join with, maybe get some kind of rep with them, maybe new items through those factions, but we really just don't know. In typical Miyazaki fashion, he did answer the question, but it leaves the question even more shrouded in mystery with more questions we want to ask. The next question I thought was really interesting was, will the ending chosen by the player in the main story have a different impact on the narrative of the DLC? Does the DLC have multiple endings? And Miyazaki answered, the DLC is an independent existence, so the player's choice in this article will not affect the DLC story. As for the ending, there are actually no so-called end or endings. Of course, the DLC will not have as many endings as the main body, but players will still have to face some choices during this game. I think I'm okay with this because the endings of Elden Ring are pretty good already, and overall, having a completely separate DLC would mean it's its own personal entity. Now, I do like how Miyazaki uses the word choices here because that implies there's going to be some replayability to go back through the DLC multiple times and try to get different options. And the last question that I want to go over is the interviewer asks, is Shadow of the Erdtree the only DLC for Elden Ring? If not, are there any other arrangements that can be disclosed? And Miyazaki pretty much says there are no plans to have more Elden Ring content. This is the final story for Elden Ring, and there are no plans to revisit this game. I'm really curious then what their next move could be at From Software. We've already waited 2 years for Elden Ring DLC after a Game of the Year was made, and I'm really wondering what their next move is. Are they working on another game behind the scenes? Are there going to be more DLCs coming out for something else? Is there a potential for an Elden Ring 2? Let me know down in the comments what you guys think and what you think overall of this interview. And guys, that is going to be it for this interview. Let me know what you guys think about it down in the comments. I'm also going to leave this down in the description below so you can follow that link and read the entire article for yourself, because there was a few questions that I did not go over, only on the basis that we already pretty much knew the answers to them and Miyazaki confirmed it. So with that being said, thank you guys so much for watching until the end. I'm super pumped about Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, and until next time, stay safe, enjoy the game, and I'll see you in the next one.